My name is Zarin, and I want to tell you something that I have never told anyone before. Not my best friend, not my cousins, not even the one person in this world I trust the most. I have kept this story locked inside my chest for 3 years, and every single day it sits there like a stone, heavy and sharp at the same time, and I think if I don't say it out loud today, it might just crush me from the inside. So I'm going to tell you. All of it. From the very beginning. And I'm warning you right now, if you think you know where this is going, you don't. Because I didn't either. It started in 9th grade. I was 14 years old, skinny, awkward, the kind of kid who sat in the second row because the back was too scary and the front was too brave. I had hair that was slightly longer than the other boys because my mother liked it that way, and I had these eyes that people always said were too pretty for a boy, which I hated hearing, obviously. I was just a normal kid trying to survive school without doing anything embarrassing, which, if you've ever been 14, you know is basically a full-time job. The school I went to was one of those mid-sized private schools where everyone knew everyone and gossip moved faster than the Wi-Fi. There were about 40 kids in my class and I was somewhere in the middle, not popular, not unpopular, just kind of there, like furniture. And that was fine with me. I didn't want attention. Attention meant risk, and risk meant something going wrong, and something going wrong at 14 feels like the end of the world. Our class teacher that year was Miss Hyra. She was maybe 26 or 27, young for a teacher, with these round glasses and a very serious expression that made you feel like she was always slightly disappointed in everyone. She taught Urdu and she was strict, but not mean, if that makes sense. Like she had rules and she enforced them, but you never felt like she enjoyed punishing you. She was fair. Or at least, I thought she was fair. The annual drama competition was something our school took extremely seriously. Like, embarrassingly seriously. Teachers would start planning 3 months in advance, students would audition, there were costumes and lighting and rehearsals after school, and the whole thing was treated like it was Broadway. I had managed to avoid it for 2 years by being deliberately mediocre at everything performance-related. I would mumble during tryouts, forget my lines, look at the floor. It always worked. But this year, Miss Hyra was in charge. And Miss Hyra had a very different approach to casting. She didn't hold auditions. She just announced the cast one day in class like she was reading out attendance. No discussion, no choices, no mercy. She walked in, put a paper on the board, and said, "This is final. Anyone who refuses will fail their Urdu grade for the semester." Just like that. Bold, terrifying, absolutely illegal probably, but also very her. I leaned over to look at the cast list from my seat and I saw my name almost immediately. Zarin Ahmed. Lead role. And next to my name, in brackets, it said something that made my heart completely stop. It said, female lead. I read it 3 times. Then 4 times. Then I looked at my friend Bilal next to me and he was already looking at me with this expression that was half sympathy and half barely contained laughter, and that's when I knew I had not misread it. Miss Hyra had cast me, a 14-year-old boy, as the female lead in the school drama. The play was a classic Urdu folk tale, one of those old stories about a brave girl who disguises herself to save her family. There were probably 12 characters in it and most of them were male, so logically the female roles were fewer, but Miss Hyra had decided, for reasons I could not understand, that I was the right person for the main female role. The hero of the whole story. The one who would be on stage the most, speaking the most lines, in full costume, in front of every student, every teacher, and every parent at the annual competition. I raised my hand immediately. "Miss," I said, and my voice came out higher than I wanted, which was deeply unfortunate. "I think there's been a mistake." She looked at me over her glasses. "There is no mistake, Zarin." "But I'm a boy," I said. "I am aware," she said. "The role is for a girl." Traditionally, yes. But in classical theatre, boys played female roles all the time. Shakespeare did it. The Greeks did it. This school did it before girls were even admitted. I stared at her. This school admitted girls before I was born. "Then we are returning to a proud tradition," she said, and turned back to her notes like the conversation was over. It was not over. It was not even close to over for me internally, But externally she had made it very clear that arguing further would cost me my Urdu grade, and I needed that grade, so I sat down and spent the rest of the class in a state of quiet personal crisis. After school that day I went home and sat in my room and stared at the ceiling. My mother called me for dinner twice and I didn't come down the first time. When I finally did, I sat at the table so obviously miserable that she immediately knew something was wrong. My mother had this ability to read me like a text message, no subtext too subtle for her, and she put her roti down and looked at me and said, "What happened?" I told her. The whole thing. And she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Okay. Just okay." I waited for more. "Okay. That's all. What do you want me to say? Tell me I don't have to do it." "I can't tell you that. Your teacher assigned it and if you refuse you fail the semester." She picked her roti back up. "So you'll do it?" I looked at her in complete disbelief. "Mama, I'll have to wear a dress." She nodded calmly. "Yes." "In front of everyone?" "Yes." "Everyone from school? My classmates? Their parents? Everyone?" "Zarin," she said, looking at me with this expression that was somehow both gentle and completely no nonsense, "it's a costume. Actors wear costumes. It means nothing about who you are. And I know you, and you will do it beautifully, and you will survive it, and in 2 months you won't even remember being this scared." I wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that I would remember it every day for the rest of my life, that this was the kind of thing that follows a person forever. But she had this way of saying things that made panic feel unreasonable, and I went to bed that night still terrified but with the faint, fragile sense that maybe, just maybe, I would not die from this. The first rehearsal was the worst moment of my life up to that point. Miss Hira handed out scripts and we read through the play, and every time I had to read a line in a female character's voice the boys around me would snicker just slightly, not loudly, because Miss Hira was right there and she had eyes in the back of her head, but enough for me to hear. Bilal, to his credit, didn't laugh once. He just sat there and listened and nodded at me encouragingly, which honestly made it both better and worse. After the reading, Miss Hira kept me back. Just me. Everyone else filed out and I sat in the empty classroom with this feeling like I was about to be told something awful. She sat across from me and folded her hands on the desk and said, "I'm going to be honest with you, Zan, because I think you can handle honesty more than reassurance." "Okay," I said carefully. "I didn't cast you in this role by accident. I cast you because you are the only student in this class who has the emotional range this character requires. The girl in this story is complex. She's scared but she's brave. She's hiding but she's honest. She carries a lot at once." She paused. "I think you understand that feeling." I didn't say anything for a moment. Is this because my Urdu essays are emotional? A very small smile. Partly. Also because I've watched you for a year and I think you are a more interesting person than you let anyone see. I didn't know what to do with that. It felt like being seen and being exposed at the same time, like someone turning on a light in a room you'd been comfortable sitting in the dark. I went home and I didn't tell my mother what Miss Hira had said. I kept it to myself and I took my script to bed and I read through the whole thing once, and then again, and somewhere in the second reading something shifted. The character's name was Roshni. She was 15, 1 year older than me, and she was pretending to be someone she wasn't in order to protect the people she loved, and she was terrified the entire time that someone would find out the truth. And she was so tired of pretending. I put the script down and I lay there in the dark and I thought, okay, maybe I understand her a little bit. Rehearsals went on for 6 weeks. The first 2 were uncomfortable in a way that I can only describe as constant low-grade humiliation. Not because anyone was actively cruel, but because every time I had to deliver a line with feeling, with actual emotion, I could feel myself being watched and evaluated in a way that boys in this culture are not supposed to invite. Feeling things publicly, especially soft or vulnerable things, is not something that's celebrated for boys in school. You learn very quickly to keep it behind glass. But Miss Hira wouldn't accept glass. She would stop rehearsal in the middle of a scene and look at me and say, "Zarin, I can hear you performing. Stop performing and start feeling." And I would want to say, those are the same thing, that's what acting is, but she would look at me with such complete certainty that she was right, and eventually I started to understand what she meant. There's a difference between saying words in the right order with the right facial expression and actually letting something land in your chest before it comes out of your mouth. I didn't know that before this. I thought acting was the first thing. Turns out the first thing is just mimicry. Week 3 was when the costume happened. The school had a drama wardrobe, a back room full of clothes and accessories from previous productions, and Miss Hira brought me in to try on the costume that had been selected for Roshni. It was a salwar kameez in deep red, the kind with embroidery along the neckline and a dupatta to match, very traditional, very feminine, and it fit me with an accuracy that felt personally offensive because it meant someone had measured correctly and I had no grounds to say it didn't fit. I stood in front of the small wardrobe mirror in the storeroom and I genuinely did not look like myself. My slightly too long hair had been pinned back with a clip by the drama assistant, just to see the full effect, and the kameez fell in a way that changed the entire geometry of my appearance. I looked like a girl. Not vaguely, not if you squinted, but actually, genuinely like a girl. I stood there for a long moment and I had this very strange experience of looking at the reflection and not immediately recognizing it as mine, and for about 3 seconds before my brain caught up, I just looked at the person in the mirror and thought, she looks nervous. And then I realized the nervous person was me and I took a step back and the drama assistant said, "You look great," with such genuine enthusiasm that I couldn't even be properly annoyed. Miss Hira looked at me in the mirror. "How do you feel?" "Strange," I said honestly. "Good," she said. "Hold on to that. Roshni feels strange the whole time too. She's not comfortable in her disguise. She's surviving it. That's different from comfortable." I nodded slowly. Something about that felt important, though I couldn't have told you why at the time. The week before the competition, things got harder. Word had spread through the school in that way that school gossip spreads, which is basically at the speed of sound, and everyone knew that Zayn Ahmed was playing the female lead in the drama. This information was received in various ways. Some people thought it was funny. Some people thought it was weird. A few of the meaner boys made comments in the hallway that I tried not to hear and mostly succeeded, except for one moment when a senior boy said something loud enough for me to catch it clearly, and Bilal, who was walking next to me, turned around and said something back to that boy so quietly and so sharply that I didn't even catch the words, but the senior boy didn't say anything after that. I looked at Bilal and he just shrugged. "Walk," he said, and we walked. I never asked him what he said. Some things you don't need to know, you just need them to have happened. The night before the competition I could not sleep. I lay in bed and rehearsed my lines to the ceiling and thought about every possible way this could go wrong. I could forget my lines. I could trip in the costume. Someone could laugh loudly and I'd lose my concentration. I could cry, which would be the ultimate irony because the character was supposed to be brave, and if I started actually crying from fear while playing her, that would be a special kind of disaster. My mother came into my room at around midnight and found me staring at the ceiling with the script in my hand. "You need to sleep," she said. "I can't." She sat on the edge of my bed. "Tell me what you're scared of." "Everything." "Narrow it down." I thought about it. I'm scared that when I walk out there, everyone will laugh, and I won't be able to handle it, and I'll fall apart, and then that'll be the thing everyone remembers about me for the rest of school. Not anything I actually do or just this one night where I couldn't hold it together. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what I remember about your first day of school?" "What?" "You cried the entire morning. Wouldn't let go of my hand. The teacher had to physically close the door between us and you screamed like I had abandoned you in the wilderness." She smiled. "And the next day you walked in on your own." "That's different." "It's exactly the same. You fell apart. And then you didn't. That's always been who you are." I didn't say anything. She squeezed my hand and left, and I closed my eyes, and somewhere in the next hour, I fell asleep. The competition was held in the school auditorium, which seated about 300 people and was completely full. Parents, students from other grades, teachers, and the 3-judge panel sitting in the front row with their notepads and serious expressions. I stood backstage in costume and I felt absolutely, completely unreal. Like I was watching myself from the outside. The red camise, the dupatta, the pinned hair, the slight kohl that the drama assistant had added around my eyes that I had objected to and then been ignored about. I looked into the small mirror on the backstage wall and I took a breath. And then something happened that I can't fully explain. I stopped looking at myself and I started looking at Roshni. The girl in the mirror who was scared but had a reason to keep going. The girl who was pretending to be someone she wasn't so the people she loved could be safe. The girl who was exhausted and terrified and still moving forward because she had decided that something mattered more than her own comfort. I don't know if it was 6 weeks of rehearsal or Miss Hira's voice in my head saying stop performing and start feeling, or my mother's words from the night before, or something else entirely. But I stopped being Zayn Ahmed who was embarrassed to be in a dress, and I became Roshni who was carrying the weight of something real. When I walked out onto that stage, the audience went quiet in the way audiences go quiet when something unexpected is in front of them. I could feel the quality of that silence. It wasn't quite sure what to do with me yet, and I didn't give it time to decide. I opened my mouth and I spoke the first line, and it came out exactly the way it was supposed to, clear and weighted and present, and I felt the silence shift into something different. Into listening. I don't remember the whole performance the way you'd expect. When you're really in something, really inside it, you don't experience it the way an observer does. You experience it in fragments and feeling. I remember a moment midway through where Roshni is confronted by someone who nearly sees through her disguise, and I felt my own heart rate spike in a way that was real, not performed, because for that moment I was not acting the fear, I was in it. I remember the scene near the end where she finally drops the pretense and says who she really is, says it out loud in front of everyone, and that choice costs her something and gains her something, and the character has to hold both of those things at once, and I held them. When the final scene ended and we took our bows, the applause was the kind that starts soft and then builds when the audience realizes something happened that they didn't expect. I heard it from behind my bow and I stood up and looked out at 300 people applauding, and I didn't cry, which was something I had been worried about, but I felt something in my chest loosen, like a knot I hadn't known was there. Miss Hira was standing at the side of the stage and she caught my eye as I walked off, and she nodded once, just once, with an expression that wasn't quite a smile but was better than a smile somehow. It was acknowledgement. Like she had expected this, and here it was. Our school won the competition that year. Best Drama. I was given the Best Performance Award by the judges, which I received in costume, in front of everyone, holding the small trophy with my dupatta slightly askew because it always slid to one side, and there was a photograph taken that I refused to look at for about a year and then one day found in my mother's drawer and stood there with for a long time. Because the boy in that photograph looks terrified and proud and completely himself. Not despite the costume. Just completely himself. The aftermath of that night was complicated in the way that real things are complicated. Some of the boys who had made comments in the hallway were suddenly very interested in congratulating me, which I accepted with a politeness I was quite proud of. Bilal said only, "I knew you'd be good," and went back to his lunch. A few girls from my class told me I had made them cry, which was the nicest thing anyone said to me that week. One of the judges, a woman from the theatre department of a nearby university, came backstage afterward and spoke to me for 10 minutes about the performance and left me her card, which I still have somewhere. And Miss Hira, on the Monday after the competition, in class, in front of everyone, said this. Some of you may have noticed that Zarin demonstrated considerable courage last week, not just on stage but in every rehearsal that led to that stage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing the thing while the fear is still present. I hope you all remember that. Then she opened the textbook and we moved on, because that was Miss Hira. But here is the part of this story that I haven't told anyone. The part that is the real reason I needed to tell this story at all. 2 weeks after the competition, I was helping clear out the drama storeroom with a couple of other students. Most of the costumes were going back on their hangers. And when I picked up the red camise to fold it, I stood there for a moment holding it, and I had this thought, this quiet, clear thought that appeared without warning and without apology. I felt more like myself in that costume than I usually do. And then I put the thought away immediately, the way you close a window when a cold wind comes through, quickly, before too much gets in. I folded the costume and put it on the hanger, and I walked out of the storeroom, and I didn't let myself think about it again for a long time. But thoughts that true have a way of waiting. They don't disappear. They just sit there, patient as anything, knowing you'll come back to them eventually because they belong to you and you belong to them, and there's no way around that, only through. I'm 17 now. I've had 3 years to sit with that thought, to turn it over, to be afraid of it, to push it away, to let it back in, to understand it slowly and imperfectly and honestly. I can't tell you that I have everything figured out, because I don't, and anyone who tells you they have everything figured out at 17 is either lying or hasn't been asking the right questions. But I can tell you that the thing Miss Hyra said about courage has become the thing I come back to most. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing the thing while the fear is still present. Every version of the conversation I haven't had yet. Every truth I haven't said out loud to the people who matter. Every time I have to stand in front of something real and decide whether to go through it or around it. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move anyway. There's a photograph in my mother's drawer. A 14-year-old boy in a red camise with a jupata that won't stay straight, holding a small trophy, looking terrified and proud and completely himself. I've looked at it many times now. And every time I do, I think about Roshni, who pretended to be someone she wasn't in order to protect the people she loved, and who finally said who she really was, out loud, in front of everyone, and how that choice cost her something and gained her something, and she had to hold both of those things at once. I think I understand that story now in a way I didn't when I was playing it. I think Miss Hyra maybe knew I would, eventually. I think that's why she cast me. My name is Zarin, and I have never told anyone this story before. And telling it feels like the first real breath I've taken in a while. Like a knot loosening. Like standing at the edge of a stage in a costume that terrifies you, looking out at 300 people, and opening your mouth, and saying the first line, and feeling the silence shift into something that is finally, actually listening. Whatever you're carrying right now, whatever room you're sitting in the dark inside, whatever thought you keep closing the window on before too much of it gets in, I want you to know that the photograph exists. The one where you're terrified and proud and completely yourself. It exists even if you haven't taken it yet. It's waiting for you at the end of the thing you're afraid to walk through. Walk through it anyway.